Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Café Conversations. My guest today is the new general manager of the RMLD, Greg Phipps. Greg, nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
So you just got appointed last November, but then your contract was just finalized.
Yeah, we were in the
a week or
finalized
two.
contract. Yep, exactly right.
So how did you get into this kind of work field, et cetera?
So I've been in the energy field for probably the last 15 years, but it started way back when I was graduating from business school, and ARCO was selling their solar energy. This is in the late 80s. And my business school, one of the colleagues and I thought that, think out of the box, so we thought we'd be bold enough to try and buy ARCO Solar. We weren't even qualified as a bidder, but hey, we got started early. So, but in the mid-2000 period, I got into the materials business and sold primarily into the solar space, primarily thin film solar, which was CadTel, which was First Solar's the biggest CadTel group, and then a variety of the CIG, the SIGs as they called them, copper, indium, gallium, selenium thin film guys, which are pretty prominent now. Silicon's still the biggest, and then we did a bunch of materials for the silicon guys as well. So brought a company into the solar space, material side of it, left them, started my own materials company, and then after that sold that company and started another company that did energy efficiency or energy optimization. So if you think about energy, you've got materials on the far left-hand side of the value, and then you've got energy optimization, which is right next to the customer on the far right-hand side. So I tend to play the extremes. So I went from material side over to energy. It was called energy efficiency, but we branded it energy optimization. And one of the bigger projects that we did were for Erickson Living, and those projects we were basically did what we call level 2 energy audits, but to look at their energy use and how to optimize it by, there are a whole bunch of things we did, recommendations for VFD drives and lighting and solar. But the more interesting things that we were proposing to them is they had a water source heat pump system, and they had basically heat pumps in their individual units, and their larger sites had 1,500 units each, 15 to 1,600. So we basically helped them figure out ways to not only put heat into the system, but to move heat from the south wall to the north, to the south units to the north units in the summertime, and vice versa in the wintertime. So anyways, got involved in that, and then got involved in, more recently, we continued to do energy efficiency and got into energy generation, solar systems, and then natural gas systems, and then software systems to run them. And ended up, one of my clients who was involved in selling to, they asked me actually to develop a product for the MLP space, the municipal light space in New England. So we developed some products for them. They asked me to help do some initial business development, and I got introduced to almost all of the MLPs in Massachusetts. And they asked me to come and help starting to do work with power supply, which is very similar to trading metals and chemicals. So what I started at the very beginning. So in a nutshell, I've stayed. Well, actually now in RMLD, we are, we buy energy, but we're looking to get back to the far left-hand side, maybe not make panels, but actually operate panels. So covering the whole value, I tend to think of the whole value stream, customer use, and then work backwards.
So back in the 80s, you were dealing with
Late
solar,
80s. Yeah.
Solar was even around back then?
Yeah, it's around back
Was it
then.
Terrible back then, or like?
It was expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, so right now, so back then, solar was, if I remember correctly, like $10 a watt. Now it's $1 a watt. So it's it's 1/10, and it wasn't very prominent, and it was all silicon based. They were a lot of, they did a moderate amount of business, and the other part of solar that ARCO also did was thermal based solar, so for hot water systems. But the PV system was very expensive back then. But if you look at this, PV's got its place in the mix in the portfolio, but if you think about it, it's one of the very few products that has not only a materials and workmanship warranty, but also has a performance warranty. So when we buy panels, or when customers buy panels to put on their house, they will typically have somewhere between a 70 and 80% performance warranty 20 years out.
Yeah.
There are very few products that have performance warranties that far out. So anyways, and once there's initial cost up front, and there's maintenance costs with inverters, et cetera, but it can be as costs continue to come down, it can be a very efficient way to generate electricity. So it's a good part of the portfolio.
So how did you end up at RMLD in the first place?
I got so the former director of IRD, he and I have worked together for probably 8 years, and so he was looking for somebody to come and be the assistant director, and then ultimately take his role when he retired, which he did. So he pursued, called, encouraged me for 2 years to come and look at, check it out. So I finally checked it out, and one of the things I find fascinating about RMLD, it's a great size. So we're roughly about $100 million in revenue. We are about 80 people. So it's a great size of a company because you've got enough resources to do things, to try things, but you're also small enough that you can be very nimble. So it's a great size entity to be able to do stuff. And what's happening in the energy world right now, partially due to regulatory issues, legislative, public opinion, and the fact that it's now a global market. Energy used to be more regional, but it's now international. So it is undergoing massive change, and I look at it as an opportunity, literally, to build a new utility that reflects the needs of what's coming down the road. So it's an incredible opportunity, a time and opportunity to be involved in this industry.
So can you tell me a little about the difference between having RMLD, which does 4 cities and 4 towns
Yep,
or whatever?
4 towns, yeah.
So what the difference between that and like a bigger entity like National Grid is? Because I know our rates are somewhat lower in comparison when you see these other ones.
Yeah, that's true.
So what is the big factor between the two?
Yeah. So, besides scale, so there's a couple of major differences. Obviously, in the case of Grid or Eversource or Unitil, which are the 3 IOUs, the investor-owned utilities in our region, they are much larger. In the case of National Grid, they are actually a UK headquartered company, so they're an international company. Eversource is more than regional. Unitil is primarily regional, if I'm not mistaken. So they're bigger in terms of scale and scope. They have different regulatory requirements than we do. And one of those is how they handle power supply. So if you think about their cost structure, they have what they call distribution charges and power charges, or delivery. So delivery, distribution charges, and then supply charges, right? And they're roughly 50-50. So lately they've become their supply charges, the power that they deliver, is a little bit higher because of external market pressures. In that power supply space, they, from a regulatory perspective, are limited to contracts that are less than 6 months in length, whereas MLPs can do short contracts, or they could do long contracts. So there's from 2010 to roughly 2019, the wholesale power supply market was basically flat. So there wasn't a massive amount of difference between an MLP and an IOU in terms of net costs on the power supply side, but the distribution or the delivery charges were very different. So, for example, right now, the IOUs are in the range of 20 to 30 cents, average about 25 cents a kilowatt hour, just no power, just for delivery services. And a comparable mix for RMLD, or comparison for RMLD, would be around 9 cents a kilowatt hour. And partially is scale and scope and efficiencies. Partly is that we are a not-for-profit. That doesn't mean non-profit. We do generate profits, but the profit goes back into the business as opposed to shareholders. That $100 million size can be very efficient. $100 million to $500 million could be very efficient. So you can see, like, we're nearly, not quite, but nearly a third the cost from a delivery distribution perspective of an IOU. And it's partially just given the structure that we're able to run at.
So I saw recently that you signed a contract for the hydroelectric power.
Yep.
So that makes us good until 2030. Is that what the
So, so that particular contract is that was the one I'm thinking of right now with First Light. Falls Village is a 20-year contract. So we have contracts. We have so when you think about power supply, one of the things you want to do with power supply is make sure that we manage the risk. And the risk, there's type of generation, could be wind, solar, natural gas, nuclear. There's the geographic location, and then there's the length of contract. Those are three main elements. And then the fourth one is who the parent company is, who runs the facility. So things can happen. A particular generation facility could have some problem and go offline. We still need to make sure that we provide power to our customers. So we try and manage risk and spread risk on those dimensions. So type of energy, geography, a good example on geography where we have wind systems. We'll have a wind contract in Maine and we'll have a wind contract in Western Massachusetts. The wind, and then as the offshore south of Martha's Vineyard comes along, we have a small piece of it, but we're not taking power yet. But as we take more and more of that, so, it could be windy in one part of the region and not windy in another part. So that's one of the ways we balance. A hydro facility, for example, hydros are very strong in the springtime because of all the winter runoff, but they tend to dry up when we get into August, which is where our peak load is. Currently, our peak load is. Solar is particularly good at that point of time. It's very good when there's a lot of sun, which is the middle of the summertime, but not so good in the springtime or January, February. So we try and balance all those into a portfolio. Hydro fits into it. Hydro is about 24% of our portfolio in 2023. It's a bigger percentage than it is on a regional basis, but it's our charter as a utility is reliable, low cost, non-carbon, and so in the case of hydro, it's reliable. Many of these facilities have been around for over 100 years. They have to be maintained, all right? Relatively speaking, it's more expensive than traditional natural gas has been or traditional nuclear has been, but it fits in. It's low cost relatively speaking, primarily because we do long-term contracts with hydro. Back to your original question, and then it's non-carbon by definition. There's no carbon generated from a hydro facility. So we always look at our power portfolio from a risk perspective, and then the reliability, low cost, non-carbon. Cost, there's, as we move to more and more non-carbon is more expensive than carbon-based resources. In 2022, they were roughly about the same. Carbon may be a little bit more expensive because natural gas got to be very expensive. But on the average, over the past 10, 15 years, carbon has been less expensive. But there's a bunch of things that we try and do balancing the portfolio to minimize the net cost of non-carbon. But it's still our charter. And as you're aware of, the state put regulation in place back in spring of 2021, the climate bill, which basically set targets of 50% in 2030, 75% in 2040, and then net zero or nearly 100% in 2050 to be non-carbon. So we're working toward those goals in the context of reliability being first and foremost. It's a fun game. It's fascinating.
I was going to say, it seems like an extreme balancing act to be able to, because to meet the goal by 2050, it seems as if it's going to take some serious work to actually get to that point.
Yeah, that's actually a great observation. The way we talk about it is with the concept of electrification, right, to be non-carbon. So it's not just what we sell, but what gets used. So the transportation sector is electrifying and the building sector is electrifying. So in the transportation, moving more and more toward EVs, electric vehicles, and the building moving away from oil and natural gas to heat buildings, to using electricity with air source heat pumps to heat buildings. You put all that together, we look at our load that we need to supply to our customers. So our customers' needs are going to be twice what they are today. Yeah. And today, natural gas generation provides half of today's load. So we basically double the load, and we're taking that 50% away. Mm-hmm. And so now we have to figure out not only, we're going to grow this non-carbon 50% piece, but how do we grow it 4 times? and do that in a cost-effective way. So it's a fascinating puzzle.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems as if it might be easier for RMLD to do this than one of these larger providers, you know what I mean? Because you kind of can do it your own way, right? Because you have more leeway in what...
Yeah, so I think you're right. There's an element, there's the nimbleness given the size, right? That we can be responsive as we learn things, right? And we can take small bite-sized chunks. How does this work? So, you know, RMLD has had non-carbon in their portfolio for 15 years, but in the beginning it was real small little pieces. Mm-hmm. And so as we go along, we learn how it works. One of the big changes that's coming, you know, not big changes, but from our portfolio perspective, is as we continue to have a larger and larger portion of our portfolio be non-carbon, which would be wind or hydro or solar, for example, all of those are intermittent resources, so they're not on all the time. And remember I talked before about the risk, you know, how to balance the risk. The risk is also making sure that they're not only in place at different seasons, but also different times of the day. Storage will come into that later on. But the point being is now our supply varies by hour, whereas 10 years ago, the majority of it was 3 blocks. It was on peak, off peak, and weekends. And just, it was always there when we needed it. Now we have to manage it very differently. So it's become even more complicated. But, and that's why you'll start seeing, well, you're already starting to see, we're doing a lot more investment in data analytics, data management, analyzing the data, et cetera, because we've got to match customer load to supply, because our job is to provide the supply, and then also help the customers be able to change their behavior to ideally kind of spread their load out over a 24-hour period. It's fascinating.
So how has the supply chain issues been for you? Are things going back to normal? Because I know some of these things were like a year or two out. Like, are we still?
So supply chain is still an issue for us and all utilities. The main pieces that are affected by supply chain are transformers. So the part of our infrastructure, we have switchgear, we have wire and cable, we have poles, we have transformers. The biggest issue affected by them were transformers. Our typical transformer, depending upon the size of it and how much loading, but roughly it's a 25-year life. So we're basically putting stuff in place that we want to be there for another 25 years. The duration, so what normally would take 6 months, 4 to 6 months to get delivered, are now in excess of a year, some cases 2 years. And so you have to manage because we're replacing stuff on a regular basis. Remember, our charter is reliable, right? So there's making sure that we replace the right transformers at the right time, because they eventually wear out. And then the second thing is expense, right? They are much more expensive right now than they have been. In fact, in the budget that we put together for 2023, the budget was almost actually a little bit more than 5 times it was in 2022, the 2023 budget for transformers. Just to, so you've got to even be in the game to be able to buy them, but the cost of them is much more expensive. Eventually so the delivery schedule should come in a little bit tighter. We're hoping that the cost goes down a little bit. It won't get down to where it was in 2021 or 2022. At least that's what we're being told. But supply chain is a big issue, and we're doing a pretty good job of managing it, because of our size, us being the largest. So we're one of the 2 largest MLPs, depending upon how you want to count. But given our size and scale, we have enough scale to be able to damper and buffer those supply chain issues. Not completely, but we don't want it ever to make it impossible for us to provide service. We think out of the box and creatively with new load that's coming in, and maintain the existing network we have right now.
So what kind of things does Reading and the other towns around us have to look forward to in the coming years that RMLD is going to be doing?
Yeah, so things that have changed. Again, our charter is to serve the customers, right? We're supposed to provide electricity to them. And so as their load changes, right, as more and more adopt air source heat pumps, we have a very aggressive air source heat pump program in place, an incentive program. As a reference, it's just under 300 the past 2 years. We're just under 300 air source heat pumps that go through the rebate system. and that's out of about 1,200 air furnaces that get replaced every year. So roughly a quarter are already in process, and so what that's ultimately going to do is probably lower our summer peak just a little bit, but they're going to increase our winter peak because oil and natural gas are going to be replaced by electricity. And if you look at our peak, across time, winter time is lower than summertime. And so by doing air source heat pumps, it's going to bring down the summer a little bit, but bring up the winter and help us balance our network and allow us to be more efficient in terms of utilizing the infrastructure that we have. But that's driven by customer need. Same thing's true of EVs. So EVs are more daily as opposed to seasonal. Air source heat pumps has a seasonal impact. And we'll see how fast EVs, there's a lot more interest, as you and I both know, both being EV drivers. But that will have an impact in terms of the load in the middle of the night. So customers' behaviors are going to change. There has been already, a huge move toward LEDs. So most of the light, the transition from incandescence and complex fluorescence to LEDs is basically done. There's continuing work for more efficient appliances, et cetera. But now we're kind of in incremental improvements. So now the real big change, I think, for customers are going to be the time of when they use their energy. And we're trying to link the cost of when they use it to the time of when they use it. And one of the examples that we'll put in place eventually will be either on iPads or phones or computers, but basically a mobile app. And the idea behind a mobile app is to make it easier for them to check their bill, et cetera, but also equally important to look at usage. So that'll be a tool for them. And then I think the other thing we're going to see, Chris, is we have time of use rates in place right now. For all of our customers, everybody can use the time of use rates, but we're in a process of tooling them up and making modifications to them to make them more attractive to customers. So I think you'll see more and more time of use rates, which will be important because now you need to know where you are. Ultimately, we see artificial intelligence coming into these kind of apps where you as a customer can say, here's what I'm trying to optimize: comfort, transportation, lighting, whatever it is, versus cost, and the system can automatically manage all that for them. Because while that's interesting for a while, eventually people have other stuff to worry about, and so they're going to want to say, automate it. So use that expert systems. But that's a couple of years down the road. But we're trying to get our first piece in today.
I will say that swapping over from a gas lawnmower to an electric lawnmower is just, you almost paid me to do it, and it's just night and day different. So I don't know why anyone would still, snowblower, I don't know about this yet.
It's coming,
Lawnmowers is so far so good. And then just being able to just come home at night, plug my truck in, and then just never have to go to a gas station again.
Right, it's like parking it almost, right? And then, you have to set it up, but you don't go to, depending on your other vehicle, you don't go to the gas station as much as you used to.
But I do like how you mentioned analytics and all that, because I'm always in my app and just looking around and just, it's definitely where things are headed. So.
Well, you mentioned the lawnmower. So we have an appliance system, and part of the reason behind our incentive programs is to encourage people to try it, right? And with LEDs, so we basically removed all of the LED incentive programs because that's all you can buy. There's no choice. So it's just so that makes sense. And if you go into a Lowe's or a Home Depot or whatever place, the local lawnmower places, you'll see a lot more electric lawnmowers and not as many gas lawnmowers. And the thing that I liked about, so I have an electric one as well. I have electric and gas, but I use electric more and more. But the thing I like about the electric is when it's dusk and you still haven't quite finished cutting the grass, the one I have has lights on it, and it's quiet enough that you're not disturbing the neighbors. So if it's 8:30 at night, you can finish that large piece of the grass. So anyways, it's interesting how the different capabilities and functions of electric can allow for different behaviors. Now, I'm sure my neighbors probably wouldn't like me do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it's relatively quiet, so they wouldn't wake them up probably.
It definitely is. Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to mention that maybe we didn't go over? Or?
No, I think the other thing is, there's a lot of changes that we're doing at RMLD to reflect the changes in the world outside of us, and the customers are seeing pieces of it, but not as much as, on the wholesale side, there's a lot of change happening. the type of individuals that we're recruiting to be part of the RMLD team as we continue to grow. We're not growing dramatically in terms of headcount, but as people retire, the new people that come in, we're looking for people that want to build a new utility, that are looking to do stuff out of the box, people that can understand data, they can help kind of see down the road, or at least be interested in what can we do differently going forward. So one thing that I want to impress upon individuals, whether they're summer interns or they're recent college graduates, or people in their first, second, or third, or fourth decade of their career, we're looking for people that want to do something different. There's an energy about RMLD, but legitimately, it's more than electricity. We are doing stuff differently, and there's an enthusiasm that's kind of run through the organization, and I think I want to make sure that the audience knows that's happening as well. At the end of the day, we're here to serve the customers, and we're trying to do it. Again, reliable, low-cost, non-carbon, but we're trying to be as creative as we possibly can to hit those 3 targets.
Awesome. So I have a picture that I would like to show you,
okay,
and get your opinion on this.
Okay.
So
it's just whether it's 2 wine glasses or 2 faces.
So, will you confirm or deny that you paid the person that did this caricature to make sure that they did it only as your face, because that looks more like you during the RMLD Open House than it does of me. So are you going to go on the record and say that you did not tell him to only do your face?
No, I did not, John. Yeah. I remember that now. You mentioned that.
Is that not him? It ain't me. That's him.
I deny. I had nothing to do with that.
All right. Got him on the record.
Who's
So that's my daughter. I mean, she looks like she's 30, which is, I guess.
It's a caricature, yes.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's pretty good.
That's you more than me.
There you go. There's the answer.
Yeah.
Right?
All right.
We'll have to ask John. I don't know.
We'll see. Got to get the receipt.
We should do that next year, shouldn't we?
He's coming back.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Perfect.
I think everybody had fun with that. Yeah, that's good.
So my final question is...
I thought that was the final question.
That's not the final. I have 2 finals. Do you like karaoke?
I have no voice, so I don't do karaoke. I'm a good listener. But
there's karaoke's here Thursday night at 50/50.
Yep.
So yes,
Be here.
someday, eventually we'll get to that.
Well, every karaoke artist needs an audience, so I'm on the audience part of the character. Yes.
I agree with you on that. But the real final question is, do you like bagels?
Of course I like
Because
bagels.
we got a lot of bagel places here in Reading, between Perfectos, House of Bagels, and Bagel World.
Yes, we do.
Do you have a favorite
Between those 3?
between those 3?
I like all 3 of them.
All
I've been to
3
2
of
of the
them?
3 of them.
You have. I think I know which one you haven't been to. So we'll go with that. But thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Just for coming, giving everybody a little insight to the RMLD.
Yep.
And once again, that was Café Conversation with Greg Phipps, the new RMLD General Manager, where I interview extraordinary people and just have ordinary conversations. Thank you, Greg.
Chris,
I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
And look forward to the next open house. We'll see how that one goes.
We will.